Alexander Vinnik, a Russian cryptocurrency expert who faced Bitcoin fraud charges in the United States, returned to Russia on Thursday after being freed in a swap that saw Moscow release American Mark Fogel, Russian news agencies reported. According to Associated Press, Vinnik arrived in Moscow after being released from custody in California, Russia's state TASS and RIA Novosti news agencies reported. They initially cited Russian aviation officials and his lawyers saying that he was flown in from Turkey, but RIA Novosti later quoted Vinnik as saying that he actually arrived in Moscow on board a U.S. government plane via Poland. He thanked both Russian President Vladimir Putin and U.S. President Donald Trump for his release. "I'm already at home with my family, and I can't quite believe it yet," RIA Novosti quoted him as saying. Vinnik, who operated cryptocurrency exchange BTCE, was arrested in 2017 in Greece at the request of the U.S. on cryptocurrency fraud charges and was later extradited to the United States, where he pleaded guilty last year to conspiracy to commit money laundering. Steve Witkoff, a special envoy for Trump, left Russia with Fogel earlier in the week and brought him to the White House, where Trump greeted him on Tuesday. Fogel, an American history teacher who was deemed wrongfully detained by Russia, was arrested in August 2021 for possession of marijuana and was serving a 14-year prison sentence. The White House said his release was part of a diplomatic thaw that could advance negotiations to end the fighting in Ukraine. Speaking to reporters on Tuesday, Trump suggested that prisoner swap could help anchor a peace deal on Ukraine, saying, "We were treated very nicely by Russia, actually. I hope that's the beginning of a relationship where we can end that war." The following day, Trump and Putin had a lengthy phone call to discuss Ukraine and other issues.
Больше 8 лет. Столько он не видел и свою семью. В Москве его ждали родители и двое детей. Первые кадры встречи с мамой.
Да, очень ждала.
Since Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022, nothing about Ukraine, without Ukraine, has been a kind of US mantra. However, this has changed now. It is now the world of Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin, and the US is no longer interested in ensuring the security of Ukraine and Europe. The Telegraph writes about this. Following a conversation with the Russian ruler, Trump said that they agreed for our teams to begin negotiations immediately. If this is what happened, then this is a great victory for Putin's worldview. The Russian president has always believed that only those countries that decide the fate of others can be truly sovereign. He has always been determined that Russia will be one of the great powers, along with the United States and China, capable of dividing up the rest of the world. That is why he has always wanted to talk about Ukraine's fate with Washington, not with Kiev. Anything else would be humiliation. However, victory for Putin's ego is not the same as victory in war. At least, it should not be, the publication emphasizes. During the Ramstein meeting, Pentagon Chief Pete Hegseth outlined Trump's position on Ukraine. The occupied territory will not be returned to Ukraine. Kiev will not receive NATO membership or Article 5 security guarantees. In addition, Washington will not send its troops for peacekeeping. Such an agreement would only reward Russia with stolen land and leave Ukraine vulnerable to a repeat attack in the coming years. Although Hegseth called for security guarantees that would make such a development impossible. If this promise is kept, if Ukraine holds Kiev, Kharkov, Odessa, Kherson and the Dnieper, if it remains free and prospers, then it will be possible to say that the Ukrainian people have won. Yes, at a terrible price and with an imperfect peace, but nevertheless, they will win, and they will have a future, the author added. But here's the rub. Trump has made it clear that America has no interest in guaranteeing either Ukrainian or European security. So the shape of the world will depend entirely on Europe, including Britain. This will mean massive investment in the military and defense industry to deter a future Russian attack not only on Ukraine, but also on the European part of NATO. Ukraine has the largest, most seasoned and capable army in Europe. If Britain and its allies keep their word, they will be able to mount a credible defense of the continent from the Black Sea to the Barents Sea and from Kharkov to country Kerry. The alternative will be bleak, the publication predicts. Putin will return to Ukraine in a few years and seize Kharkov and Kiev. Then he will invade a NATO country, confident that the alliance will not live up to its rhetoric about collective defense. More than one article has appeared in Western media about the abrupt change in American policy toward Russia and its war against Ukraine. Associated Press writes that one of the signs of this was the signal that Washington and Moscow may work to reach an agreement to end hostilities in Ukraine without Ukraine. Bloomberg also writes that Donald Trump has turned years of US policy on the war in Ukraine upside down with a single phone call. European leaders who were generally in solidarity with Washington during Biden's tenure were stunned to learn of the call, with some saying it seemed to signal that Trump was giving up on Ukraine. In the frozen fields of Ukraine, history's largest stockpile of Soviet military might is disappearing at an unprecedented rate. According to Euromaidan Press, the weapons that Kremlin generals spent a generation accumulating for a decisive confrontation with NATO are instead being consumed in a war of attrition that has already depleted more than half of Russia's available hardware. The war, Europe's bloodiest since World War II, is burning through tanks, artillery and armored vehicles faster than the Russian military industry can replace them. By 2026, military experts predict these critical shortages will force Moscow to either end the war or fundamentally reimagine how to wage it. An investigation by The Insider reveals the scale of this military erosion, documenting how Soviet military power, once thought inexhaustible, now faces a countdown to depletion. Since the start of the invasion, the military tracking project Oryx has documented stark disparities in hardware losses. Russia has lost over 20,000 units compared to Ukraine's 7,600. In armored vehicles alone, Russian losses triple Ukraine's 11,600 versus 3,800. Among completely destroyed equipment, Russia has lost 2,600 tanks, 1,900 APCs and 4,100 infantry fighting vehicles, while Ukraine's losses stand at 700, 800 and 900 respectively. Artillery losses show similar patterns, with Russia losing nearly 2,000 systems. About half of Russia's lost equipment comes from Soviet-era stockpiles. Other databases like Warspotting and Lost Armor report similar trends, though methodological challenges exist. These include potential duplicate counts of repaired vehicles and unverified losses without visual evidence. Recent combat data reveals evolving patterns. During Ukraine's 2024 Kursk offensive, forces lost approximately 10 tanks and 35 armored vehicles monthly. In contrast, Russia's ongoing Pokrovsk offensive shows monthly losses of 40 tanks and over 80 armored vehicles. Russia faces mounting challenges in replacing its battlefield losses, with current production woefully inadequate for the war's demands. The numbers tell a stark story. Russia manufactures only 250 T-90M tanks and 460 BMP-3 infantry fighting vehicles annually, less than half of what it's losing in operations like Avdiivka and Pokrovsk. Among infantry fighting vehicles, the BMP-3 is the only Russian IFV still in mass production, while the modern BTR-82 APC line manages just 300 to 400 units annually, including modernized, older models. The situation with Soviet-era stockpiles, long Russia's strategic reserve, is equally dire. Satellite imagery from late 2024 reveals just 41 to 52% of pre-war reserves remain, most in poor condition. The usable inventory has shrunk to approximately 2,000 tanks, 2,000 IFVs and 3,000 APCs, a dramatic decline from the Soviet Union's 1990 arsenal of 63,900 tanks and 76,500 armored vehicles. Many remaining tanks are obsolete, T-62s, while some vehicle categories like the MT-LB are completely depleted. Production faces critical bottlenecks, particularly in artillery manufacturing, where barrel production has become a key constraint. Military analyst Andriy Tarasenko warns Russia's repairable equipment reserves could be exhausted within 12 to 18 months unless production increases to 700 to 1,000 armored vehicles annually, a target the current industrial base cannot meet. Replacing losses with newly built vehicles is impossible without unconventional solutions, such as purchasing old equipment from countries like India or launching an unprecedented new industrialization, he explains. The problem extends beyond production numbers to repair capacity. Russia's armored repair facilities struggle with technological limitations and poor quality control. The situation is so dire that 2 to 3 decommissioned vehicles most often be cannibalized to restore a single operational unit. Throughout the war, the Kremlin has effectively been fighting on credit, as equipment deliveries have never matched battlefield losses. Ukraine has developed a more resilient approach, combining captured Russian equipment, Western military aid, and Soviet-era vehicles from allied nations. Initially benefiting from abandoned Russian hardware, Kyiv now relies primarily on Western support and domestic production. Western intelligence suggests that if combat intensity continues, Russia will face critical equipment shortages by early 2026, potentially forcing a strategic shift. Armored vehicles and artillery scarcity are dramatically slowing territorial advances on both sides. While drones and loitering munitions have transformed warfare, they cannot replace traditional artillery support needed for effective offensive operations.